When I sold my first course, only 3 people purchased it. And I was discouraged and I was very frustrated because I knew my content was excellent. So what was missing? And I would spend hours tweaking my landing page dozens of times, and still my sales were not coming through. Now, at this time, my wife and I were selling house items we didn't need on Craigslist to generate more cash for our business. And a guy came over to buy my circular saw called a skill saw. I'll never forget, he gets out of the car, he walks over to where I was standing, and he holds this skill saw in his hands, and then he hands it back and says, "I changed my mind." He then started walking back to his car. Now, as he walked away, I called out, I said, "Excuse me, sir, why did you change your mind?" And he said, "It won't work for me." I said, "Oh, okay, but can you tell me why it won't work for you?" And he said, "I need a saw that can cut through metal." And then I replied, "Oh, well, this saw can cut through metal, no problem. You just need to use a carbide tip blade and it will cut metal like chainsaw through cheddar cheese." He handed me a wad of dollar bills and he took the saw. Now, I thought about this story for a long time. Like, what changed his mind? How did he go from, "I won't touch your circular saw," to "take my money"? And I retold this scenario a dozen times in my head. And then one day it suddenly hit me. I had discovered what moved my prospect from a skeptic to a customer. And so I immediately applied this new discovery to my landing page and then sent out an email blast. Within 24 hours, I made over $100,000 in sales. Now, I'm going to show you exactly what I discovered and how to apply this to your offer. Even if you have zero online selling experience, when you apply this discovery, they will buy. And here's what happened on that fateful day. I overwrote his false belief. The reason people aren't buying your product is because you are not overcoming their false beliefs. This is the most common thing I see for people trying to sell something. Let me explain to you how it works. Let's just say you're selling training on how to play pickleball. And your prospect, Bobby McGee, says, "Well, I don't want to buy your training because I won't be able to learn how to play." And so you reply, "Oh, you'll be able to learn. It helped Susie and Johnny learn in 3 months." Big mistake. Why? Because you did not address their false belief underlying his surface objection. Here's his surface objection. "I won't be able to learn how to play pickleball." But his underlying false belief was, "I'm not athletic, therefore I cannot learn how to play any sport." Where did Bobby get that false belief from? Well, he had a negative experience sometime in the past. In high school, Bobby McGee spent most of the seasons on the bench because his coach told him he's not athletic. And since that day, Bobby has always believed that he can't learn how to play a sport. So think about this. When Bobby objects that he can't learn how to play pickleball, and you say, "Oh, but you can. Susie and Johnny learned," Bobby is going to think, "Yeah, and Susie and Johnny are probably those athletic types. So this just further proves that it would never work for me." You lost the sale because you never addressed Bobby's false belief underlying his surface objection. So how do you fix it? It's easier than you think. You overwrite Bobby McGee's false belief with a new story. But to overwrite Bobby's false belief, you must first know what his false belief is. So when he objects to buying your product, do the same thing I did with the prospect who was going to buy my circular saw. Just say, "Why? I can't learn how to play pickleball. Why not?" Or, "I won't be able to create and live off of a budget. Why is that?" Or, "I can't shed fat and get shredded. Why do you think that?" And once you ask that question until there were no more questions to be asked, that means you discovered their false belief. And sometimes you're going to have to ask, "Well, why that? Well, why that? Well, why that?" until you get to the root cause. That's the false belief. Once you understand the false belief driving his objection, you tell him a new story to overwrite his false belief, which I'll show you how to do. But first, let's go back to your prospect, Bobby. Okay, Bobby, why do you feel you can't learn how to play pickleball? Notice I didn't respond to his, "Oh, this won't work for me," with the solution. I asked a question. And Bobby says, "Well, because I'm not athletic." Now, right here, you're going to be tempted to say something like this. Oh, Bobby, my program is set up to make it really easy to learn. Every training includes step-by-step instructions on exactly how to learn the shots for pickleball. That's called using logic to sell, and it simply doesn't work. People will not buy your training because you logically convinced them. They will buy because they believed that your training will get them the results they are looking for. And why did they believe? Because you overwrote their false beliefs with a new story. So instead of heralding the glories of your training program, tell Bobby a story about how you or one of your clients who is terrible at sports took your training and today can play pickleball proficiently. You want your prospect to go, oh, that's me. That's my struggle. Man, if it worked for them, then it must work for me too. Once you find your prospect's false belief, you don't disprove their false belief. You don't argue about their false belief. Instead, you overwrite their false belief. Let me show you what I mean. One late Friday night, I met up with a group of people in downtown Austin to pray together before we would break off into pairs of twos to go talk to people about Jesus. This is something I do pretty regularly on 6th Street here in Austin. Sometimes I'll do it at the Round Rock Outlets here in Round Rock, which is a suburb of Austin. This one particular night, we finished praying in a huddle, and I opened my eyes, and a man was staring at me like arm's length away. And these are the first words that came out of his mouth. He says, all Christians are hypocrites. And so I said, well, why do you say that? And he goes, because I used to be part of a church and they accused me of being a pedophile. They are a bunch of liars. And so I asked the man his name and he said, James. So I shook his hand and I said, James, I said, if Christians from that church were hurtful to you and unfair, I am so sorry, man. People claiming to be Christians have hurt me as well. But I want to ask you something. Let's say that you just met EJ here and I pointed to my adult son who so happened to be standing right next to me. And EJ told you that he follows Jesus. Does that mean that EJ is a hypocrite as well? And James replied, without hesitation, yes. Now, keep in mind, James did not appear to be high. He did not smell like alcohol, and he was dead serious. James illustrates the power of belief. Because James had been mistreated by Christians, he adopted a false belief that all Christians are hypocrites. Now you're probably thinking, Seth, that makes no logical sense. And I agree, but beliefs are often not birthed out of common sense. When someone goes through something that is emotionally charged or traumatic, even as a highly intelligent human, he or she can adopt beliefs that are incredibly irrational. And those beliefs will hold them back from buying your program. But here's the good news. Two different people can have the same exact experiences, yet end up with the exact opposite beliefs. My favorite example of this is the two brothers who grew up with a drunkard father. Now, one of those brothers became a drunkard just like his dad and ended up homeless. The other brother never touched a bottle of alcohol in his life. He ended up with a beautiful family and launched a lucrative career. What's crazy is both brothers had the same drunkard dad. So what made the difference? One believed that he was doomed to be like his dad, and the other believed that he could be the very opposite. Both brothers lived out their core beliefs. This is why beliefs is so central for you succeeding as a businessman. You must understand your prospects' false beliefs that are underlying the service objections. 9 times out of 10, when they give you an objection, it's not really an objection to your product. It is the result of a deeper false belief. Let me give you another example. Let's just say your prospect says, well, it's too expensive. Let me ask you a question. If I was to offer you a pencil and I want you to buy it for $30,000, would you do it? Probably not, unless it like shoots lasers and flies. Now, let's say I was going to give you a brand new Tesla Cybertruck for $30,000. Would you buy it? Of course you would. That is a steal. Notice that in both scenarios, the value, the price, was the same, $30,000. The price didn't change. And in scenario number 1, you would have said, that's way too expensive. And in scenario number 2, you would have said, wow, take my money. I want the Cybertruck. So what changed? the value of what was being sold. So if someone objects to you saying, hey, it's too expensive, understand they're not really objecting to the cost. They're objecting to the value compared to the cost. In other words, in their mind, the value of your course or your coaching program is not high enough. That's the underlying false belief, the belief that the value is not good enough. And if that's their objection, that means you haven't done a good enough job on showing them the value. This shows you, the story of the two brothers shows you how swayable yet impactful beliefs can be. A single belief can literally change the course of one's entire life. I mean, think about the disciples of Jesus. They went from terrified men running from the temple guards to becoming bold preachers who were murdered for their faith in Jesus. What shifted? One thing, their belief. Because after Jesus rose from the dead, they now believed, truly believed, that this guy, Jesus from Nazareth, he has to be the Messiah. He has to be the King of Kings. People don't just die and then walk again. This has to be the Son of God. A single belief created massive change. And the same is true for your product. When you overwrite your prospects' false beliefs about your product, you open the path for them to invest in your program. But how do you do that? Well, let me first tell you how you're not going to do it. You're not going to overcome their false belief by using facts about your product. What you must do is overwrite their false belief, and you override it by telling them a new story, since after all, they came to their belief from the beginning through their own story. My prospect would not buy my circular saw until he heard a new story, my own story, that using the right kind of blade, you can cut through metal. And that single story turned him from a skeptic into a customer. Do the same with your product and watch what happens. If you want more content like this, go to sethkniep.com, SETHKNIEP.com.